So I can call this meeting to order. The Finance and Administration Committee meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority of Monday, May 3rd. And just a little bit of housekeeping information. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the State of California Executive Order N2920 of March 17th, 2020, in consideration of the coronavirus. All members of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance and Administration Committee and staff will participate in this meeting by teleconference. I think I don't need to read probably the rest of that. So Andrea, if you could do a roll call for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Committee Chair Rennie.
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Makachuk.
Present.
Gibbons.
Yes.
Barber.
Present.
Thank you. Martinez Beltran.
Here.
Klein.
Here.
Thank you. All members are present and we have a quorum.
Sounds good. Next up is public comment from members of the public for items that are not on our agenda today. And I see no attendees, so I'm assuming none of those no attendees are raising their hand. So I'll close the verbal comments for items not on the agenda and move on to the consent calendar, which consists of one item. That's approve the minutes of March 23rd, 2021 for our Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Would anybody like to make any changes or a motion? Member Klein?
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Brian. And any members of the public wish to comment? Don't see any hands raised. Any other comments from the committee? Don't see any. If you could do a roll call vote for me, Andrea?
Yes, thank you. Chair Rennie.
Yes.
Vice Chair Gibbons.
Yes.
Excuse me, not Vice Chair, Director Gibbons.
You
Vice
did
Chair
say
Makachuk.
I answered
Thank you. Director Makachuk.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye.
Thank you. Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
All right, that sounds good. Next, we move on to our regular calendar, agenda item number 2, which is the CEO's update, and I'll turn it over to the CEO.
Thank you, Chair Rennie. Just 2 quick items, and then I'll be happy to take any questions on this or anything else. One is just an update on the prepay. We continue to work on the prepay now with East Bay Clean Energy. You've already approved the bond conduit with 3CE and MCE, so that's in place. Now we're working closely with East Bay Clean Energy and Morgan Stanley on the details of the transaction. So Amrit's very busy with that. So it's more of a heads up that we will be bringing back to you the transaction documents. I would think the earliest would be in June. And if it's necessary to call a special meeting in July, we will, but probably June or August is what we're shooting for right now. Then in June, we'll also be doing a budget kickoff with the board as a whole. And the idea is we have June, August, and September to go through the budget. So typically in June, we also update the strategic plan. So right now we are working with staff, getting input from the directors. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll get input from all staff to make changes to the strategic plan. At this point, I don't see any major changes to the strategic plan, given that the initiatives that were the major initiatives that were identified in last year's strategic plan, they're all in flight. But regardless, we're going to take a look at it, and then we'll bring that back to you in June also, along with the budget, at least the kickoff of the budget. So those are the only 2 kind of information items I wanted to bring to your attention, and happy to take any questions from you.
Okay, let's see if there's any questions from the members of the public. Don't see any hands raised from the members of the public, so we'll close the public testimony on this item. Come back to the committee. Any questions from our committee members? Does not look like it. I think this is just an information item, so I will close this item then and move on to item number 3, which is our COVID-related customer debt and delinquent payment policy. And it looks like we're going to hear from our Director of Account Services and Community Relations, Don Bray.
All right, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, directors. Since COVID began early last year, we've seen past due balances from customers grow substantially. This is a result of us suspending our delinquent payment policy. We did this at the same time PG&E stopped their disconnection policy. But now that we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and as PG&E is considering resumption of their traditional approaches, we have to think through how we want to deal with this substantial bubble of past due payment. So I'm going to take you through quite a bit of detail here. This is Liz's second time through it. We had a robust discussion through many of these same slides with the executive committee late the week before last, and I'll share some of their thoughts towards the end of this. And then we can discuss it as a group. Next slide, please. So I'll provide some background on SVCE's historic delinquency policy and PG&E's historic policy. We'll talk about where we are statistics-wise versus our historic debt levels. We'll talk about PG&E's timeline for resumption of their disconnection policy. We'll talk about additional programs that are currently under consideration at the CPUC. We'll talk about what some of our goals are in this and the constraints that we deal with in confronting this challenge. And then, as I mentioned, the high-level options that we discussed with the executive committee and where they were coming down in their thinking. Next slide. So historically, PG&E has disconnected customers who fail to pay. They have a pretty tightly described policy, but they've generally historically been pretty patient in executing this policy. If customers are showing sort of any ability to pay or make partial payments, they will not go through with the disconnection process. SVCE has had a policy of doing what's called sendbacks. And if we see customer balances growing to a certain level and a certain level of past due, and that was $100 more than 90 days, we would send them a late payment notice. And if they didn't correct that status over the next couple of months, we would do a sendback. We would, in a sense, opt them out back to PG&E. And that was really to sort of limit the damage, to not have those balances continue to grow. We don't have disconnection ability. Only PG&E can do that. Our sort of ultimate treatment here is to do a sendback. Historically, those sendbacks ran about 150 to 200 a month. So certainly less than 1% of our customers were sent back each year for non-payment. Next slide, please. So this is what's happened over the last year. PG&E suspended their disconnection policy in March of last year, and at the same time we suspended our sendback policy. So we've seen arrearage grow. Historically, our debt from customers ran about $2.5 million at a given point in time, and we're up to close to $6 million outstanding right now. And you can see the numbers of customers have grown as well. Typically 13,000 customers at 31 plus days, and now we're looking at about 21,000 in that status. Historically, we wrote off about $500,000 a year to unrecoverable debt. And one of the big questions now is, where will we be again as we start to resume our policy around sendbacks and write-offs? And I'll share some numbers on that in a minute. Next slide, please. So if we break out arrearage by sector, we see that the majority of the issue is residential. Almost 2/3 of arrearage is residential, and this is substantial because only 1/3 of our load is residential. We have a lot of money that's very past due, so 1.7 million greater than 180 days, so basically out for half a year. So that's the overall picture. Again, heavily residential. Next slide, please. If we look at the 150 days past due, this is where we absolutely would have sent customers back historically, right? Because we start noticing them at 90 days, and then at 150 we would do sendbacks. We can see that in that status right now, we have over 6,000 customers. So if we were to just turn on our traditional sendback policy, as of this month, we would have a lot of customer sendback. So this is really the issue. What do we do about this? We can see that in that 6,000, there's a substantial care FIRA, or low income designated customers, representing 1,800 or so of that number, and a substantial non-care FIRA group as well. So, but we do see a little bit more of a care FIRA representation there than customers in general. The average balance for customers past 150 days is about $325, and that's with us, right? Remember, they owe PG&E, of course, a balance as well for T&D and for gas, and that balance would typically be even higher with PG&E. Next slide, please. So PG&E is planning to end their disconnection moratorium as of June 30th, with disconnections beginning conceivably as soon as late August for residential customers. So this is the time frame that we'll be looking at in terms of restarting up our policy. They're also going to begin this summer doing care FIRA recertifications, meaning customers are going to have to verify that they indeed qualify for a low income status. And there's been a lot of care FIRA signups here over this last year because PG&E didn't do certifications. So you could basically sign up to become a low income customer and get a 20 to 30% discount without any questions asked. Well, that certification is scheduled to begin again this summer. Next slide, please. In terms of programs that are out there, again, care FIRA qualification entitles you to a minimum 20% discount on your bill. So this is something that we've been encouraging, and PG&E's been encouraging over this last year. There's a program called Arrearage Management, or AMP, and it's for qualifying care FIRA customers that have over $500 in debt with the utility, PG&E, and past, I believe it's 90 days. We have over 2,000 qualifying SVCE customers and about 280 enrolled in this program. If you enroll in the program and you make on-time payments for the next 12 months, each month, 1/12 of your current debt is written off. And also associated with this program, we get that money back. So we don't have to write it off. That money we receive comes from a public purpose fund that all PG&E customers contribute to. So this is a really good program all around. We get paid back, the customer gets their debt forgiven, assuming they can make payments on time over 12 months. This just began a couple of months ago. You may remember this was a board level item for us to sign up for this. So it'll be a priority for us to continue to try to get additional customers who qualify actually enrolled in this program. There's also a traditional payment plan where you can pay back over 12 months. So 1/12 of what you owe gets tacked onto your bill each month. So basically financed repayment. And then there are other third-party programs like LIHEAP and REACH. LIHEAP is federal, and REACH is a community-based program for providing one-time support to customers to pay their utility bills. The CPUC, as I mentioned, has also opened a proceeding to deal with this. So they're looking at additional one-time forgiveness and expanding that 12-month payment plan to 24 months and providing some additional leniency, if you will, in terms of not breaking the plan. So allowing for 3 monthly deferrals over those 24 months. The decision on this is expected in another few weeks. So we'll know more in terms of what other programs are available when we look to really restart our policy. Next slide, please. So in terms of our exposure, it's difficult to know, right? Remember, historically, we were running at about 500K a year, but we think that additional SVCE exposure is probably putting us at the low end in the range of another 1.2 million to the high end of 3.9 million. So the reality is probably in the middle somewhere. For this fiscal year, we have increased our bad debt allowance to 1.5 million from, again, that traditional 500K number. But, will that be enough? Will some of this bleed into next year? Likely. And then in terms of FERA credits and small business credits, remember last year we did that very substantial program where we provided our FERA customers with $100 in relief, and small business customers that applied back to us $250. So, very substantial outlay of over $3.5 million that we made in terms of direct payments to customers that could be impacted. So the situation might be more difficult if we hadn't done that. Next slide, please. So in terms of our goals and the constraints that we're dealing with, ideally we'd like customers to get caught up, and for us to recover that funding that's currently past due. We'd like to minimize sendbacks to PG&E and minimize any future exposure. We'd like to leverage third-party programs to the extent we can for our benefit and our customers' benefit. But some of the challenges are that we are only a portion of the customer's outstanding balance, right? With PG&E, they still owe T&D, PCIA, gas charges, and we have very little visibility into what that overall debt picture is with PG&E, much less the customer's overall debt picture in general, right? I mean, it isn't just energy bills that many of these customers are dealing with, it's rent and other costs as well. Another thing I should note is that historically, for residential customers, PG&E gets paid first. So if a customer makes a partial payment, that partial payment covers PG&E IOUs and not SVCE IOUs. It's only when PG&E is fully paid up that we see our balance addressed. This is called the payment waterfall. It was actually suspended during COVID, but it's expected to resume again post-COVID. So if we gave money to people to pay their energy bill, generally, it could be applied to PG&E first and not make it to us, just as a for instance. Next slide, please. So with the executive committee, we looked at three sort of structural options. One was to just immediately resume our historic policy, and that would result in a lot of sendbacks. We would resume this policy presumably in the June-July timeframe, coincident with when PG&E is reinstating their policy. We would send customers that were over $100 and beyond 90 days notices, but for customers that were at 150, boom, we would send them back. Option number 2 was a phased or gradual resumption where any customer, regardless of how in arrears they are or for how long, we would do a 3-month process, 2 to 3 month process where we would send them notices and give them a little bit of time to, to correct that situation. We would also, during that time, do our very best to advertise available programs such as AMP, if that customer qualifies, or other programs that are available. Option 3 would be to do those same 2 things as in option 2, but to provide additionally some of our own funding into the mix. So in a sense to do, additional bill credits, maybe like we did last year. So when we talked through this with the executive committee, I'd say where they generally were coming down, if we can go to the next slide, was with option 2, a gradual resumption. There were also suggestions to try to get additional information on federal dollars that are available directly and through the state, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, for instance, the Homeowner Assistance Fund. So we've started looking into this and gotten some good information and contacts in addition to the utility programs that I mentioned earlier. So really putting together a broad range of information. Much of this is now on our website, but proactively communicating it through direct email and direct mail to our affected customers in the coming months. And really making that in large part our investment in this, but stopping short of actually putting additional dollars into a direct customer debt relief. So that was the discussion. I know we went through a lot of data there, but to just open it up to the group for your all's questions and thoughts.
Let me open it up to the public first. See if anybody has questions, comments from the public on this one. I don't see any hands raised, so I will close public comments. I can start it off with 2 questions, Dawn, that I thought of. The first one is, you're talking about PG&E cutting people off. Can PG&E cut people off if they're still one of our customers also? Because you're saying people are going to be in debt to PG&E and in debt to us. And if they get really indebted, PG&E might cut them off, but we've decided we didn't want to cut them off, but we don't have a choice at that point, right? PG&E can just cut them off.
Correct. PG&E maintains full power to do that.
And so if we send them back, is PG&E more incentivized to cut them off than if they're still one of our customers also?
No, they're not. That would not really affect PG&E's thinking. But in particular, due to the waterfall payment issue, it is conceivable that our exposure could continue to grow, as the customer pays enough or makes partial payments and can keep the lights on.
And so sending them back means our exposure does not grow anymore.
It does not grow, yes.
Okay, so the second question I had, if we send a customer back, that means it's now PG&E's customer. Maybe they pay up and now we've lost a customer. If what's more likely to happen these days is people are they have a rent bill they haven't paid, and they have a bill to us they haven't paid, and they may get evicted coming up after the end of June, I guess. If we send them back, does the new person automatically go to PG&E when there's somebody new at the address? Whose customer does it become, or do they have to? Is there an automatic in that? If it's already our customer and somebody new comes, we keep the customer, or if we've given it back, then we don't get a chance at that customer anymore at that address?
Yeah, any new customer, again, assuming that they're not coming from within the service territory and, we're already opted out, by their own volition, they would become an SVCE customer until they opt out. So new customers, new move-ins are always SVCE unless they opt out.
So we could send these customers back to PG&E, and then if they were evicted, we would probably get the new customer at that address back in our as our customer.
Correct.
Okay, let me go to Director Klein.
Yes, and thanks, Rob, for asking one of my questions. Continuing down that path of a customer that was going back to PG&E, at that point, as far as the debt collection, is it completely SVCE's responsibility? Does that remain, you know, a debt on the larger PG&E bill, assuming that they're going to be doing anything from a collection standpoint?
Yes, it actually stays with PG&E, and they will make an effort to collect it. And so for instance, you saw that we generally write off about $500K a year, right? But we were doing a few hundred sendbacks a month. So say, a couple thousand a year. So yeah, we will eventually see some of that money, but not all of it.
Okay, so the waterfall method, so it remains a PG&E collection. If that customer does come up with a plan to pay back, we would ultimately see a portion of that conceivably.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And then as far as cities, so I saw breakdowns of kind of, numbers and how much people are owed. Do we have a breakdown from a municipality standpoint? One of the things that Sunnyvale has done during COVID is we funded Sunnyvale Community Services, which helps out for food, but they also help out for rent and utility bills. So, that's one of the things that we've done with city dollars, federal dollars, helping people during COVID. And I'm wondering, what percentage is Sunnyvale, but I'm assuming some of our cities have similar programs through their service organizations.
Great question. And for next week's board meeting, we'll definitely get that pulled together. We can do a general breakup. But I mean, what we usually see with these sorts of things is, there's some alignment or correlation, right, between wealthier communities with less and vice versa. But every community has this issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was all my questions. Thank you.
Director Gibbons.
Thank you. So my comment is a little bit of feedback from the executive board meeting. There was a lot of discussion about how to treat our customers, knowing that none of this is going to be like a light switch turning, pardon the analogy there, turning money on and off in people's income and ability to pay. There was a lot of discussion about how to use Silicon Valley clean energy money. And as Don indicated, the value of handing out more money to our customers because of the waterfall effect didn't really accomplish a lot. The thought of using that money to have a strong campaign to help our customers with debt was to help them understand what their options are. And that again is what Don was alluding to, but that was a very, very strong sentiment at the executive board about finding a way to help people stay with their electricity and stay as our customers. So it was a real focus on the customers. So when we ended up with that, if you will, middle solution, the remaining conversation was, okay, so do we leave it at $100 in 90 days or do we change it? And the discussion went back and forth. I came up with a confusing, complicated idea and then afterwards thought of a simpler one. So I'll put that one forward here, which is to the point of people not being able to just jump back on the bandwagon. perhaps we should consider changing our policy by upping the dollar amount for being in arrears. So instead of being $100, we might make it $200. And instead of 90 days, we might go to the 150 days. And then staff could come back with an analysis of what that would do. I think we all agree, as with the conversation here, which I found fascinating on this board, have a lot to do with the money and the risk and minimizing our risk going forward. So there is a point at which we have to say, we have to let them go and not continue our risk of additional loss. So I'll just offer those points for discussion. I'm inclined to be supportive of really trying to encourage and help people know that they have all these programs and funding options so that they can get their bills paid. But being realistic, there's a point, and I think that requires a modification to our policy for the moment. And then I believe that there's a point at which we have to say, we have to let people go, customers go.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Any other questions or comments? Director Makachuk?
Thank you. We are still 1% lower than PG&E, is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct. So if I was a customer, an electricity customer, and I could get a 1% cheaper, I would virtually always do that because it's cheaper. So if we were to send customers back, it's not like we would be losing customers, because if they got back on their feet, they would come back to Silicon Valley Clean Energy, I would think. That's kind of a rambling thought. And then if we send the customers back, then PG&E has other financial solutions that they can offer that would be, that we don't have access to. Did I hear that correctly, Don?
No, most all options that PG&E has. In fact, I can't think of one that our customers don't have that PG&E customers have. And those are the things that we would advertise, like the AMP program or the payment plan. They're executed through PG&E, but our customers can be on those, assuming they qualify.
So the only benefit by sending those customers back would be that we stop our losses, and PG&E could incur more bad debt expense, more losses from those customers, correct?
Correct.
And Don, you might comment a little bit on, along the lines of Director Makachuk's comments, that there's a certain amount of inertia that once people are on us or PG&E, it's harder to get them to switch. They have a certain inertia. So if you throw it back to PG&E, there's some inertia for them willing to bother to switch back for 1% kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not terribly likely that they would come back to us. Another thing to, of course, keep in mind is just how dynamic our customer base is, right? Close to 20% of our customers turn over in any given year. So, even customers that are behind, if they move or whatnot, that premise, opens up to a new SVCE customer. So, yeah, we haven't seen a big sustained impact, say, in our opt-out numbers, or we call it participation rate, continuing to to diminish because of sendbacks that we've done. It tends to stay pretty close to 4%, even with the sendbacks.
Okay, Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you. I would just say that I like what Director Gibbons had to say, some of her comments about raising it to 100. This year has been particularly difficult for most people. I think if 100 was our standing policy, that it would warrant moving that to 200. I also think that people are more willing to stay with, we're constantly talking about the advantages that we've brought to the community. And I think that in doing that, working with people during one of kind of the times that they've been in most need is important. And so if we do provide, change the policy to be $200 and then go use our 150 days, I would support that. I guess my question is, what happens after the 150 days? Is that still a 3 months to meet the conditions? Is that some other number to meet the conditions? But I would like to see us try and help and support our customers through this time, given that it's been historically one of the most trying for so many. Thank you.
Director Gibbons.
I was just going to comment at the other meeting. I believe the question was asked, if someone is sent back to PG&E, can they come back to Silicon Valley Clean Energy? And as was said, the inertia may or may not be there, but if the intent is to come back, the answer was 1 year. They can come back in 1 year.
Yes. Yeah, if it's the same with a customer opt-out. If a customer opts out, they have to stay opted out for a year before they can come back. You can only go back and forth at a minimum 12-month interval.
Director Makachek.
Another question. How aggressive is PG&E going to be perceived by the public when they stop the current program and they start cutting people off? Like, what's the sentiment? Do you have a measure for that? Feel for it?
I know it's something they're worried about, and that the PUC is concerned about. I mean, just given the scale of the challenge here, and PG&E has generally been, as I mentioned, pretty cautious. I mean, they try to exhaust sort of all reasonable methods before just shutting people off. So yeah, they're going to be sensitive to it, but they're, I think, between a rock and a hard place right now, just given the scale of arrearage they're dealing with across all their lines of business, well, including gas. So I don't know, Girish, if you have a perspective, a utility industry perspective that's any different, but.
No, I think this is a little fluid. I think we'll know more in the coming months. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on this issue with the PUC, both from I mean, the PUC would also get blowback, right, if this is not handled properly.
Director Barber or Member Barber.
I was hoping if the staff could reiterate again the steps that are taken to notice customers that are delinquent and maybe compare that with what PG&E does. Are we sending notices at the same time as PG&E, and so our customers kind of getting two different requests on that notice? Or maybe can you explain that process again?
No, our notices are separate from PG&E's. And our notices are hard copy, and at 90 days, they go out, if a customer's past $100, and then they'll get two more, although it's shortly after the third one that they're sent back. So the third one is really just sort of a final notice. So think of 150 days really as the full cutoff point. They should be receiving before then PG&E notices for delinquency that was on the second or third slide. So they should start to hear from PG&E as soon as, maybe they're a month in arrears even. And yet, again, they can make partial payments. They can go on payment plans. There are these various ways that they can, not fully pay up and keep the lights on. If a customer does get shut off, then they have to pay their entire bill, right? Their entire, IOU amount to get the lights turned back on. So partial payment definitely happens, and it's part of the reason that we'll see residential balances grow over time, so that it's coming to PG&E first.
And Dawn, if I could go back to some of Director Klein comment about the programs that we're using in various cities. I don't know their programs very well. We use West Valley Community Services in Los Gatos. We give money to them for food and rent assistance, and I think probably also utility assistance, but I'm not sure. And I'm a little worried that PG&E is getting all the help, and we kind of get the raw end of it. Especially if there's rent programs now where if the landlord takes 80% of the rent, then the government kicks in, and if there's and then the renter kicks in the rest, right? And so the landlord takes a little bit of loss, but they get paid. Well, if they do that, those kinds of programs with utilities, we're going to take all the loss, and PG&E is not going to take any, right? I'm a little bit worried that we end up the loser all the time here. That's not to say I'm going to make a decision that hurts people over making sure PG&E gets equally hurt with us, but I do worry a little bit about this that they get paid first, and there could be a lot of partial payments for quite a while, and we'll be taking the brunt of that. So when you research these programs, I would be curious to see, are they full assistance, are they partial assistance kinds of things to understand, and if people are making partial payments, maybe it is a good reason to send them back, because their lights will stay on, but now PG&E is taking their fair share of the losses on it.
Yeah, one thing I'll just point out quickly, this waterfall payment scheme has been suspended. So everything's pro rata right now, but it's expected that waterfall will resume post-COVID. And I think one of the things that's being considered at the CPUC right now as part of that set of things that are under consideration is continuation of the pro rata versus waterfall, at least for another 12 to 24 months until the COVID bubble is worked through. This is something that Cal CCA and our L&R folks have lobbied for. Whether it winds up in the final decision, we don't know yet. And then for commercial customers, it's always been and continues to be pro rata. So why this distinction for residential customers and the waterfall payment? I don't know, but it's only been on the residential side.
Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you, Chair. I I also wanted to ask about the programs that are available. Dawn, are we able to apply for those on behalf of our customers, or does the customer have to apply for that?
The customer needs to apply. Yeah.
Okay.
It-
And there's nothing that enables us to go on their behalf and try and solicit some of those funds.
I'm not aware of something like that. I think in some of these cases, especially with the Biden or federal dollars, there are opportunities for cities or other jurisdictions maybe to apply for some of those funds, but I'm not aware of a utility being able to.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, and you may have said this, but I thought you were talking about PG&E. Is there any type of incentive that we offer if somebody is able or does make their payment, that we provide some type of credit to them from SVCE?
If I'm understanding your question, some way that we can apply a credit?
Or some type of incentive. I thought I heard you say that with PG&E, if they pay a certain amount, then a certain portion of that is forgiven. Does that also apply for us, or how does that?
Yes. So under the Arrearage Management Program, AMP, when a customer who has to be a Carafera customer and they have to qualify, they have to have at least $500 outstanding. Then when they apply for that AMP program and begin, they have to make on-time payments for the next 12 months. And maybe you get one, 1 month that doesn't work out, but you got to make on-time payments generally. And each time you do, 1/12 of that balance that you started with is forgiven.
Oh, okay. I
So
see.
if
And
you
is
went into
that,
that, yeah.
does that also apply with SVCE?
Yes, that applies to SVCE and PG&E dollars, right? And we get compensated for that money that was forgiven. We get paid back
Oh, great.
through
Okay.
public purpose dollars.
And
So-
have we thought about offering any type of incentive for customers that do pay back? Clearly it would be a win over losing the full amount that they're past due and they never pay, even if we do send them back, or having them leave and just not return as a customer.
The third box on the 3-box chart that I showed it did include the notion of, should we or could we provide additional dollars?
Of course, once, all of those things have been, once we've received payment for what the agreement was.
Yeah, it is tricky because again, if we apply a bill credit, it's a credit to the bill generally. It's hard to know who absolutely qualifies, or to have a real clear. We'd really have to think about how to do something like this, but it is conceivably an option, right? We did credits for all Carafera customers last year, and just across the board. Some of those Carafera customers probably didn't need it; others probably really did. But it was clear what our qualifications were for customers receiving those credits.
Okay, thank you.
Director Gibbons?
Thanks. Don, would you go over that, your last comment about the difference between residential and commercial and here's accounts? My mind went off gear on that one.
Okay, so this waterfall payment scheme where PG&E gets paid first has been the way it's worked forever with residential customer balances. But with commercial customer balances, it's always been a fair scheme. Any dollar that a commercial customer pays gets applied pro rata. So if 1/3 of that debt is with us and 2/3 is with PG&E, that's how the dollars get broken out.
So is there any benefit to having a different policy? This is a whole new question. Is there any benefit to having a different policy for commercial customers versus residential customers?
The lion's share of the challenge is with residential, right? 2/3 of the problem is with residential. PG&E has always had a tighter leash on commercial customers, historically at least. It'll probably be resumed a little bit that way, but they did suspend disconnections for small and medium businesses, right? So, small business is kind of where a lot of, residential customers are very impacted. So, yeah, it's something we could conceivably do. It would have its own impacts.
Yvonne, did you still have your hand up? Guess that's
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
So Don, what do you need from us? I'm not sure we've asked a lot of questions. Are you looking for some direction, or is this just a discussion we're having?
And maybe I'll go for the trial close here, but from what you've all been saying, it sounds like you're sort of generally in the same zone that the executive committee was in. I haven't heard any big push to do something differently. I did hear a suggestion that rather than $100 in 90 days, maybe we look at something like $200 or some different threshold. I would like to ask a question back if I could real quick on that. But I think if with guidance like that, that's sort of all we need today. And then we can bring this back next week. We'll include the city breakout by city. Liz also asked last time for kind of a summary slide up front. We'll endeavor to do that. And then maybe we sort of take it to this basic proposal, which is going to look something like the one in the middle option. If we, historically it was $100 in 90 days. Option 2 suggested that we don't cut anybody off. We don't send anybody back right away, but rather even if you're 210 days past due, you get 2 notices before the 3rd notice that would cut you off. So again, kind of a gradual resumption of our policy. If so, is that okay? Is that, I'm seeing heads nod. The $200 is $100. We could, should we do something with that too? Or should we say, if you're past, when we turn on the policy again, if you're at 150 days and greater than $200, we'd send you back.
And I'm not quite understanding how moving it to 200 fits in with what you just suggested.
I'm kind of asking you. That suggestion was made, so
Okay, let's see. Director Klein had his hand up first. We have several hands coming here.
Thank you. And before I kind of answer that, and I do think that conceivably extending the day or the amount makes sense. You mentioned about the arrearage management program, of which 2,200 customers qualify and 280 applied. Is there an effort to do outreach to
Yes.
to that group to try to get the other 1,900 and whatever?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is something that we're working on and PG&E are working on. PG&E is doing some direct calling. We're going to do some direct mailing. Yes, but those people will probably never reach, but yeah, we should be able to expand that number.
Okay. And do we have a feel for what percentage of our basically of the group that hasn't paid that ends up being as far as money monetarily? Do we have any feel for that?
There was the one slide that showed, people past 150 and there were about 1,800 Carafera customers on there.
Okay,
Probably a large number of those would be.
would overlap with the
Yeah.
possible program. Okay, okay, good. And thank you for that. Definitely, when it comes to the board, I would just like a little more information about that program again, just so I can, I know we talked a little bit about it a month ago, 2 months ago, but
Mhm.
that a little more information would be useful. And then as far as extending the program or exchanging our policies, at least what we've seen as far as, how people have been hit by COVID, I do think it really makes sense to give them a little more flexibility. Although that being said, if the average is, $500 owed, how many people that immediately affects becomes a big question. But
Mhm.
I would err on trying to keep them a little bit longer as customers of SVCE. But I understand that conceivably a large portion of them are immediately transferred because of policy. And I think it might behoove us to delay a month or two as far as the policy is concerned, make the policy more extensive, just to see what PG&E Debt really does in August, and the other half of that is what kind of blowback they get conceivably from press and the local community and the Bay Area in general on disconnecting people that have been hit by COVID. That's all I have. Thank you.
Director Gibbons?
Suggestion was to
Yeah.
potentially delay the start by just a month or two. Is that
Correct. I think
Okay.
that's something that we should also, when it comes to the board, be looking at, because the timing of this might mean that the legislature or someone else, the CPUC, steps up and says, okay, we're going to help out more because there's so many, this is a statewide problem. And, to push a lot of people back to PG&E early might, there might be more information to be gained there. That's, at least from a timing standpoint, it might be good to delay, when we start taking action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Gibbons?
So actually, Larry, I think that's a very clever approach. I'm just picking numbers. You could postpone it for 3 months and say to all our customers that are in arrears, we are giving you a 3-month hiatus, and then we will initiate our policy again. So it's a positive all the way around. And in that 3 months, you've got all of these opportunities to find a way to pay us. I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think the small businesses need to be part of this equation. I know our residents are clearly important, but for our communities, our small businesses are our lifeblood. So I would be amenable, and I think we have a definition given the last round of funding we did of what qualifies as a small business. And I would offer them the same extension.
Okay.
Director Makachek, I saw your hand next.
Yes, perhaps for the next meeting, for the board meeting, you could have a slide on the waterfall and versus the pro rata, because I think that if we're moving back to the waterfall, then that's where we're putting more, where we're paying a higher percentage, if you will, right? So if you could have a slide on that, that would be great.
All right. Good suggestion.
Member Barber?
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few points, and these are general comments, not necessarily. Please, staff, don't interpret them as mandates. Just some advice and some input on this process. Customers likely don't really have a grasp on the difference between different governments and what we do versus what PG&E does. And so they're likely under this assumption that there's a deferment on kind of all utility payments, whether it's water, gas, electric. And so they probably do need some sort of period to adjust to the fact that, okay, that's now over. We're moving on from that point, and they need some sort of opportunity to come back into paying their bills. And so that was the first point I had, and they'll need education. They'll need a few months. So I think that's very wise, as the other board members mentioned. Second one is there's a lot of science behind messaging. There's company behavioral insights that helps cities and certainly special agencies come up with how exactly do you message in those public notices? Because there's a lot of different things you could say that can tip them towards or nudge them towards actually making that payment. So something like most customers who receive this notice pay within 1 week. And that cues the customer into thinking that, okay, this is kind of a social responsibility. I need to do this. And so there's little ways that you could look into to figure out what's the best way to message this. And there's different resources online to tap into those different studies. Or you might want to go with a message that follows the talking points of, this is a nonprofit. Every time we have write-offs, we have to increase the rates for everyone else because it's zero sum. And so just things like that help people understand that, oh, I have to take care of this because then if I pay this, I'm helping my community. There's a bigger picture. Then the third thing is it might be prudent to have some sort of analysis to justify the dollar threshold. So if we're saying $100 or $200, it might be within staff capacity. It might not be within staff capacity or staff availability to do this, but to have some sort of quick analysis that shows that, okay, well, if it's past $150, 90% of customers never return, they never make those payments. So it's worth going down the route of writing those off. But every $5 below 150, it increases the percentage that customers usually typically pay off that debt. And so just having that kind of data driven decision or data analytics to kind of figure out what that threshold could be could really inform you on what the ideal dollar threshold is. That way it's not just a matter of policy. And I don't mean to assume that it was just an arbitrary number, but just to protect you so that it's not an arbitrary number, you would have some sort of justification that could show and inform you on what to do. That's all.
Thank you.
Director Gibbons, I guess you decided not to comment. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. I think, Don, you've got lots of input to come up with something.
All right. Thank you all very much.
All right. So we'll close item number 4 and move on to item number 5, which is our future remote work policies. And I guess our CEO is going to drive this one.
I believe we're actually on item number 4, which is SVCE organizational chart and title amendments.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Wow. Yes. We'll go back to item number 4. I had switched my page and then switched it again, which is yes. And that's still with Girish, I guess.
Kevin Armstrong will be driving this presentation.
Okay.
Yes, good afternoon, directors and committee members. This is Kevin Armstrong, Administrative Services Manager on the Finance and Admin team. And I'd like to speak a little bit today about some proposed staffing changes to the organizational chart. If we could scroll to the next slide, please. In March, we brought to you a number of position changes, particularly with regards to increasing flexibility across a number of positions. And we do the same thing here in May as well. So similar to March, we're not proposing any new headcount to the organization. So that would remain constant at 32 full-time employees and 5 part-time employees. And the position revisions, while there would be some adjustments to salary ranges, would have minimal budget impact overall, since we're not really increasing that headcount at this time. As I mentioned, both in March and now, what we're aiming to do is largely to broaden a number of our positions from, say, a single position into a series. And the rationale for doing that, and this is similar to what I think many of your member agencies have as well, whether it be called broadbanding or alternate staffing is the ability to both promote internally and recruit across a wider range of position levels based on qualifications and experience. And then in addition to that, we'd like to just revise a few job titles to make internal job duties better differentiated, or to align them with the rest of the series within a team. So I'll explain that in just a moment. Next slide, please. So here you see a summary of the proposed changes for this round here in May. Two of the teams, finance and admin, and our policy team, are going to have no changes at this time. The others all have a number of revisions that I'll walk through right now. So on the decarbonization and grid innovation team, there are several positions. There's a manager position, a senior data engineer position, and a data scientist position. And those exist as single positions. And so what we're proposing is to expand those each into a series with various levels: associate, senior, associate, standard, senior, or in the case of data scientist, senior data scientist, principal data scientist, in order to provide, again, that sort of broad banded scope to allow both for internal promotion and easier recruiting. In addition, in order to make a differentiation between two different series that are on the decarbonization team, we'd like to amend the titles of the program analyst series to program manager to differentiate it from the data analyst series, which also exists. So that really encompasses the changes that we're proposing for decarbonization and grid innovation. On the power resources team, we would like to actually recast one position, and we have an existing vacant power analyst position that was approved last budget year. And we'd like to transform that into a new power settlements manager position to really focus on, looking after our contracts, making sure that contracts and settlements, are tracked and effectively handled in the front office and passed on to middle office to make sure that we're really square on all of those functions, particularly in advance of the operationalizing of our PPAs, just to make sure that all of that flow of information is consistent and accurate. In addition, similar to the decarbonization team, we have an existing power resource planner position that we would also like to propose expanding into a broad-banded series. So that would go from one position to 3 established job descriptions, but again, no increase in headcount, and the existing staff person would remain, where they are at the time. Finally, the last element is just in the account services team. Recently, we retitled a number of positions in that team from energy consultant to energy services specialist. And this is really just aligning the manager of account services position with that series of staff underneath it. So really tying them all together with the title of energy services. So that would be rebranded as the manager of energy services. With that, I have detailed slides following, but I'm actually going to ask if we can jump to the updated positions chart, and that's slide 7. And this really just illustrates sort of where those changes are. Again, these red boxes that you see are not additional headcount positions, but just the locations within the organization chart where changes are being made. So you can see the retitling in account services to energy services manager, retitling of positions within decarbonization to those program manager positions, which are existing. And then in the power resources team, you can see the transformation of that analyst role into the power settlements and compliance manager position. With that, again, I have the detailed slides that I can add if there are any questions about specific positions, but I would like to open up to questions if there are any from the committee.
Okay, let me open it up to the public, see if there's any comments. I don't see any hands raised, so I'll close the public comment, come back to our committee. Would any member of the committee wish to ask questions or comment? Director Gibbons.
I just offer a comment that over the duration, there have been a lot of adjustments to staffing. And about, I'm going to say a year ago, that it was realized or explained to the board, however you want to phrase it, that the organization in its growth with the number of contracts and the responsibilities and all of that, the organization needed to be flexible to meet the dynamics of the changing roles and responsibilities. And that's why It's for me, it's reassuring actually to see some of these changes, because it says to me that we are constantly on top of how the staff is working, what their responsibilities are, the chain of command, that kind of thing. It just shows an attention to how the organization is morphing based on its our business, basically. So I think these are very reasonable approaches, and I think were explained well.
And I agree with Liz also. I was, I've been here since the beginning, and I remember when we first started making the org charts, and they were simple and they got a little more complicated. And as like Liz says, as we've matured, it makes sense to now be thinking in different ways than when we started off. So I agree completely.
Thank you, directors.
So I guess that looks like it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if it's okay with the board or the committee, given the support here and just it's not really increasing headcount, we would add this to the consent calendar for the board meeting with some additional comments to reflect what you just said, what Liz and Rob kind of said in terms of us being on top of what's changing in the industry and adapting to that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You see all agreement there. So I guess that means we can close item number 4 and go on to number 5 that I was so anxious to get to. Future remote work policies.
All right. So that would be me. So Andrea is going to get the deck up and move to slide number 2. So March 16, 2020, you still remember we were on the 2nd floor of SVCE's office suite 290. And, just the previous week, we had heard that, hey, Monday, we were going to have this shutdown, gathered staff in a circle and said, hey, go home. We'll be in touch, but take your stuff with you. Take your laptops and we'll figure things out. Take as much office equipment as you can. We thought a month or 2. And we quickly came to the board and also asked for things like emergency leave. What if someone got hit with COVID or someone in the immediate family got hit with COVID? At that time, we were expecting people may, be out for 3 weeks or so. So the board approved 20 days of COVID-related emergency leave that was outside of the regular paid time off that you provide all employees for benefits. Then in July, we extended the remote work until January 2021. And as we actually came into fall, we kind of realized, you know what, we don't have any idea of vaccines, right? So people were talking about vaccines in fall, but there really wasn't any announcement that we could depend on. And we had people who had made changes to how they were working from home. So we said, let's just come back 100% remote work through September 30th, 2021. And if a vaccine regime comes up earlier, and we were thinking best case scenario, we'd all be back to normal in May. Well, we'll just have a few months of, back to normal when we're still telling staff they can work remotely. So this is where we were. And let me just say also, when you think about this, and all of us have been immersed in this, right? We've spent a lot of time, the management team, employees, really being engaged in how can we continue keeping morale up and continuing with productivity. So we've done a lot of things to keep the relationships going and morale up. But at the same time, as all of you have also experienced, there's been a tremendous amount of stress that the agency has gone through. So we can talk about that later. So next slide. So during this period, we had a number of staff that departed. For example, we had a CFO depart, we had Hillary depart, we've then got new people in. I actually haven't met Amrit face to face yet, or Karthik Rajan. I got the pleasure of meeting up with Melissa last week. So we spent some time together, and of course, Benna Chang. And one of the challenges we've had here is also in terms of hiring. We still continue to have several vacant positions, which has kind of added to the stress of our organization. But we continue to work to add, to fill those positions. And I think in about somewhere between 3 to 6 months, we should be more stable there. And in terms of locations too, we have some folks who are one person from West Sacramento, one person actually, after trying to go out a couple of times and we couldn't find someone, we finally found someone in Texas and we hired this person. Again, this was like, we just had to make certain decisions. And one of the things that in terms of the conversation I had with this person when they were being hired was, I would expect them to come to work at least once a month, this person in Texas, but it would be on their dime. Again, this was all based on unknowing, right? We didn't know we don't know even now what exactly this future is going to look like. So let's move to the next slide. So as we start to think about our future, I kind of think about it in kind of like two phases. One is just thinking about a post-pandemic steady state phase, right? When maybe when COVID-19, we consider it more like the flu, where there may be annual kind of issues, but we've kind of contained it. And from everything that I've read so far, that's maybe 18 months or so away before we really get a handle on, whether it's international variants and how that affects us. They're talking about different ways in which we can get vaccinations out, whether it's sprays and pills, easier ways to vaccinate ourselves. So let's just say, when we think about that long-term steady state, that's one end goal, one end state. Then there's the other state of, okay, how do we get from here to that state? What do we want to look like in terms of getting more face-to-face? What does this hybrid workforce kind of look like? Work policies look like? So we thought about, some objectives as opposed to looking at what I'd say being very specific about things like, oh, you need to be back 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Let's look at actual objectives or interests that all of us have, whether it's board, stakeholders, employees. And safety. Everyone's interested in safety, right? Safety of employees, safety of the board, safety of the community. Another interest is when we think about these new workforce policies or even this phased workforce policy, it's our ability to retain and attract. We all know Silicon Valley is a tough place to recruit. It was pre-pandemic and even during the pandemic, extremely difficult to recruit. And I think this pandemic has changed fundamental expectations. And this is something that whether it's the high-tech companies like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're all grappling with. They know there's a shift, there's an underlying shift globally, but we don't know where that's specifically settling down. But I think some things we're seeing are, you got to tailor a solution. There really isn't a one size fits all. You got to tailor it geographically. You've got to tailor it to different kinds of employees. And I'm sure each of you in your own cities have your own issues you're dealing with, right? I think all of you in cities have more operational responsibilities, right? Whether it's police, fire, public works, where you have 7/24 constraints of operations, where you actually have to be present geographically. So we need to look at each of that, and of course for the SVCE organization, both for our current employees and prospective. Then another objective that we have, again, through this transition period of say a year to year and a half, and this whenever we get to steady state, is efficiency and effectiveness. We want to make sure that we have an effective board, effective staff, and the relationship between the board and staff is also effective and efficient. So what does that look like in practice? And one of the really surprising things about working from home over this last year, and this is not just my own personal experience hearing about it from staff, but this is also in the literature, is how productive people were on the whole. Because pre-pandemic, and I was one of those people in the camp of, it's got to be FaceTime. FaceTime, you can't replace FaceTime. And even though that's true, I think there's a lot one can actually replace without having FaceTime. And there's a lot of benefits you get from that. So over here, one of the things we thought about is how can we preserve the positives of remote work? And how do we mitigate the negatives of remote work? So both need to be looked at, right? So we should look at those. And then overall, we also surveyed our staff right through this pandemic period. We've been surveying our staff to see how they feel about remote work, whether their morale, what kind of support they need from us, whether it's infrastructure and tools, support from their boss, more social interactions, etc. And similarly, before coming up with this presentation for the board, we talked to staff about this. And basically the response we got was get a phased approach going, assess and pilot things. Another comment that was made is emission reductions are also a benefit one gets from having some kind of hybrid kind of workforce policies. So these are the interests and kind of questions we should be looking at from our perspective. Next slide. So this is back in August, we actually had a very good survey done by this company called Morning Consult. It was a report we read that they had surveyed about 1,500 employees across the country. We basically took those questions and surveyed our employees using the same questions. So here are the pluses and minuses, right? And we have lots of detail on this. We'd be happy to share specifics on all the answers to the questions with the board. But the high level summary is on the top part of this slide is the positives. And the bottom part are the negatives that our employees felt when it came to remote work. So, all kind of obvious, but part of it was just experiencing it, day after day made a difference. And one other thing, anecdotally, I'm hearing over the last month is some of our employees who have kids, and as kids return to school in some way, that's also changing their experience of work. So it's evolving. Next. So here, department directors went to their staff, and here's the feedback. Will in-person requirements be vary by role? How do you work meetings where there may be few people remote and few people in person? Today, all of us are remote. So there's a certain, what should I say, standard there. Can in-person days be focused on collaborative meetings? So we take advantage of us being in the office to do collaborative meetings versus maybe one-on-one meetings. And then phasing and iteration sounded good, which was let's start slow, take baby steps with something we heard about quite a bit, and then iterate. Let's pilot, let's see what works and be adaptable. Also, we got quite a bit of feedback that they appreciate that this was not a top-down kind of decision-making. And also, we've been, at least management team, myself, have been reading widely about what other organizations and especially HR professionals are seeing. And this thing of including employees in this discussion is very important, because this isn't like commute policy in a pre-pandemic world. Coming to a post-pandemic world, there's a lot more going on where, concerns about safety just vary, and perceptions of safety just vary quite a bit between employees. So they do appreciate this being a discussion. Next. I'm in touch with our general counsel, Greg Stepanisic, and I know all of you are probably more expert on this, which is how do state laws and emergency orders, how is that going to determine how the board and committee meetings operate? So right now, the governor's executive order allows for these kinds of meetings like what we are having, but we don't actually know what even post June 15th would look like. Governor Newsom has said he's going to lift that emergency order. That emergency order covers, it's economy wide, and it covers so many different things. So we don't actually know how it would impact Brown Act. At the same time, we also have multiple bills that have been introduced into this legislative session around amending the Brown Act and allowing for broader teleconference options and more participation. So there's still TBD on that front too. Next. So our thinking here, we wanted to get your feedback. So one of the reasons to bring it here is to just kind of get the board, the executive committee and finance committee just on the same page in terms of our current thinking, knowing that there's lots of uncertainty ahead, but at least knowing that Governor Newsom is planning on lifting the executive order, knowing that the vaccine regime is going quite well in California, this is the time to kind of talk about it. So it's getting you up to speed right now. So right now, I've told staff, as I told them back late last year, continue to allow staff to work remotely through September 30th. However, any in-person work prior would be voluntary. And then we're not going to have a requirement for in-person. At the same time, let's start with, as we come back, let's start with some social interactions, some smaller meetings, and then some smaller group meetings. Even our strategic plan updates that we're looking at right now, we've got a request from at least one director to have maybe their group meet outside for having a face-to-face meeting. So we're looking at what kind of procedures we can offer to our employees, of course, taking a lot from the Santa Clara County public health guidelines. Next slide. I think I may be. Okay, so after October 1, our idea is we'll transition to a hybrid structure over a few iterations. So we were thinking over the next 6 to 9 months after October 1, let's have a few experiments, so to speak, right? Let's figure out what you want, what employees want, and kind of mash up something that's quite creative. And we'll work with you and the employees to propose something. Right now, and then we're also looking at our HR professionals and our benefits to look at, what are the legal issues and benefit issues as we move forward with a hybrid structure. Next slide. So we were thinking maybe a board kickoff discussion in May, very similar to what we're doing now. Another thought I had is, do we want to create an ad hoc committee? Do you want an ad hoc committee of the board to help work with staff on creating this post-October hybrid? Additional employee discussions and surveys through summer, and then launch that hybrid structure starting October 1. So this is our current thinking. I think that's our last slide. Is that true? Yeah, okay. So that's what I have.
Okay, let's open it up to the public, see if there's any comments. I don't see any hands raised. We'll close the public comment, come back to our committee for comments and questions. Director Gibbons.
Oh, I'm going to let the others talk first.
Okay, Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you. I really just have some comments on the various ones. So let's see. I think, first of all, I think the SVCE has done a fantastic job transitioning through all of this. And I really appreciate the mindfulness, not only my colleagues, but the leadership of SVCE has had for our employees. Anyone who does not have small children at home, as I do, and I have 3, and I will tell you that I can imagine even where we're at now in COVID. Love, can you please stop doing that? Even as we, in real time, even as we are now in COVID, if you don't, it could be easy to assume that we're a little more normal than we are. But when you have kids who are not in school, we're going 2 days a week. It's incredibly chaotic is the best I can give to you what it means. And so for all of our staff who do have small young families, this is such a difficult time, and we're seeing that they're able to hit the mark. They're able to get the work done. I can only imagine what that increase in productivity will be once children are back at school. Because right now it's this tag team between parents and, moonlighting and everything else. But once we're back to our normal schedules where, everything's running just so well oiled, it's going to be, I think, very different. And I think we will see much more productivity. So I'm in support of that. I would like to see, as we do this and we talk, whether it's a committee or it's just, having different input or surveys, I'd like to see that we have equity in that for numerous reasons. You've got people not only that have small children, but people who are taking care of their parents or have a dependent that they care for. So many different competing priorities. I want to make sure that everybody, no matter what your role is, that you have an opportunity to take advantage of having the ability to work from home or remotely, to save in commuting costs, to save in time, to take care of your dependent care, whatever that might be, to have flexible schedules. So I think it's important that we have that at all levels and all roles in SVCE. I think, of course, we need to look at what works, and some roles may need to be there more than others, but as long as we're kind of looking through that lens, I think that's really important. I think that will help us be competitive going into this new phase. We're a whole different world after COVID. This will be something that is a competitive, kind of mark for companies that are moving forward and staying up with technology. And those are the types of employees that we want, that are willing to flex and be on the cutting edge, especially in this line of work. And so I do think with the executive order being lifted in June, I do know there's some bills that are going through now looking at the Brown Act and making sure that even our groups are able to meet more often on Zoom and waiving some of that. So those are just some of my thoughts as we move forward, and I look forward to hearing all of yours. Thank you.
Director Klein.
Sure, I just wanted to continue some of the sentiments. I think kudos to SVCE for being, forward thinking last year and sending people home with, equipment. I think that was exactly the right thing to do. Who would have guessed, more than, 400 days later, we're still pretty much remote for most companies in the Bay Area that can do it. That being said, it'll be interesting to see what changes from a Brown Act standpoint and how much meetings change. I know that multiple bills started out that they were going to change that and earlier this year, and I think multiple of them, AB 703 is one of them. There were several bills that have already been moved into 2-year bills. So I don't let's see what ultimately happens mid-year and how quickly we tackle the Brown Act issue, as far as how I think noticing will still be the same, but in presence or hybrid, and how that plays out will be interesting. But I do think it's important, as Director Beltran Martinez said, is making sure that employees have that option and have that ability to do partial, at least partial remote work makes a sense from an environmental standpoint, as well as, I'll say, a life work balance at the end of the day. So I do think that it will be a transitionary thing, but it'll be something to continue to offer our employees and give them that benefit. So I look forward to see how this continues to change in the next few months. Thanks.
Member Barber.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really impressed with staff's presentation on the matter and how progressive they are in engaging staff on this topic. The only thing that I really wanted to add to, besides echoing the other members' comments, is adding to the conversation by recommending that there is some sort of schedule on when people are in the office versus not in the office. Microsoft did a study where they had all of their staff and plus a data center transition to remote work. And they really only found that they could reduce their environmental impact with greenhouse gases and the air conditioning gases when they had everyone off at the same time. So for instance, if there is going to be a hybrid model of sometimes we do remote, sometimes we're in person, that we block off some days that everyone's remote. That way you're getting the benefit of completely turning off the lights in your offices and turning off the AC. Or that there's maybe some even more progressive model or hybrid model where you don't actually fill a permanent space with your offices, but are using some sort of shared space with some of our agencies when you meet for board meetings, further reducing the overhead impact for our budget for the agency. So you wouldn't have rental or building expenses in that idea. So something to think about, food for thought. I just wanted to contribute that to the conversation. Thanks.
Director Gibbons.
So thanks. I began this comment with the other group by saying, if you remember Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he sticks his hand inside the mouth of the stone and doesn't know if he's going to get bitten by spiders or snakes or what he's going to find. So I'm sticking my hand into the unknown with risk. I know we have done a great job. I think remarkably so, given the complexity of our organization over the last year and a half. And I think the ability for the group to look ahead has always played itself out well. I don't know what to think about the next year and a half. To be honest with you, I'm not as pessimistic as the example that Girish is putting forward. I am more optimistic that the world is going to be in better shape. And I have been known to be a pessimistic optimist, but I am really being an optimist at this point. So I'm not as concerned about that duration. I do think we have to plan for it and be flexible, but I think we also have to be aware of what it means in the long run, because once you start the kind of discussion that we're starting, it's setting a precedent for how the organization would work 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. So I personally absolutely cannot stand Zoom. I do not think it functions well in terms of interhuman communication. I know there's other things like Teams and other things. I've only used those occasionally. I've been doing Zooms, and I've been doing Zooms 15 to 20 hours a week for the last year. I find them very ineffective. Small group conversations like this, we can make it work. The disadvantage, and for those of you that are new, it's going to be a little bit hard to describe. We have had one of the strongest, I think, the strongest underpinning of the organization has been the relationships established personally in the same space, if you will, face to face, with the colleagues, the other members, the board members between themselves and the board members and the staff. There's a real sense of identity and camaraderie and respect that has been built up because we work so closely together. We have side conversations and we work through things. And to me, this Zoom meeting is way too formal. You can't really catch each other's eyes. You can't quite see who's doing what where. And I just have my eyes fixed. So I was hoping it would be better. So I am absolutely struggling with this idea of remote working. I respect the fact that the organization has some really significant skill sets that are needed, and that there's reasonableness to be flexible with locations. I'm like Mel, being in Sacramento makes sense because of the nature of her work. Having our guy in Texas, I know we went out 3 times, I think, to find someone. So that's a real expertise. We have to do things like that. So I'm not carte blanching saying you can't do anything, but I really am concerned about the dynamic between the board members. It's really important. One of 13 board members, who has a board of 13 members that gets us along as well as we do? I mean, it really takes time and effort to build those kind of relationships. And I'm you can do an ad hoc committee, you can and do whatever it is you want, but I would really feel of all the things that Girish mentioned. It's more than replacing FaceTime. It's the relationships. It's the really getting to know and having working relationships with each other. And council members, I mean, we'd see each other every place, you know, and now we don't. So who knows? But that to me is a serious consideration that hasn't really been part of Girish's presentation. I'd also concur, I think, with Director Klein that the Brown Act issues are pretty up in the air about whether we can go forward without being in person. And if the board's in person, then staff has to be in person to support the board, I think. That's a big if. The other thing is there have been a lot of studies saying that women with young children particularly, but women with children have suffered significantly in their professional lives working from home. So I think sometimes that people aren't quite comfortable expressing that, but I think that's something that needs to be recognized. So it's not that I don't like this idea, but I do not have a comfort level on its functional validity. And for what it's worth, I go to ABAG and I say at ABAG meetings, people are going to work from home. Your statistics are wrong. Our transportation are different. Our needs are different. And they literally just throw me out the window or off the bus because they're saying, no, it's all going back to normal. So the world is going at each other. So I'll just say I'm struggling with this. I'm really having a hard time, and I'll just ignore the fact that I have gray hair.
I think the most important thing, Girish, is we're missing those really good lunches that you used to provide. And now I don't have an excuse to ride my bike to Sunnyvale also, so. Go ahead.
So I've heard Liz's comments. This is the second time. So I actually think I may not have expressed myself properly because everything you say, I agree with. So I don't really see much of a conflict. And maybe I'll make a couple of points. One is, on average, we have, say, 22 working days in a month. We may have 2 to 3 board meetings a month, max. I don't think I need employees in the office 22 days a month in order to get that 2 to 3 days of super effective relationships with the board. Plus, I also 100% agree with you that I require more than that to get relationships between employees going. But I'm also 100% sure that we don't need employees in the organization 22 days a month in order to work effectively. As a matter of fact, this is a thing that has been just evidenced over this last year, right? And I'm going to go back to a bottom line deal, which actually Yvonne mentioned in her closing remarks, which was, it's actually it's a competitive advantage. We've really got to do this, right? So when I talk to other, and I've actually asked other CCA CEOs, what are you doing? What's your thinking? And so one has said, well, we are going to accommodate some who may be even 100% remote, but it's going to be some kind of mix, very similar to what I'm talking about. It's going to be some kind of accommodation. And my fear is this, right? We are a very small organization. If we take, and I don't think you're saying this at all, Liz, but if we do take a very hard line, say, hey, you've all got to return to work for a substantial number of days per week, and I know you're not saying this, I think we'll lose people. Because if someone, another CCA is offering a lot of flexibility, think about this person has no friction. They can very easily change jobs and do essentially the same thing. And I don't see Silicon Valley's traffic and cost, et cetera, going down dramatically. So going back, I really think we can come up with a hybrid that works very well for board staff relationships. So that may be something else I will add as an interest and actually bring that out and make it more clear, because that is a huge interest of mine, to make sure that the board staff and the board and my relationships are very strong, right? So that could be an interest. And then the inter-staff relationships also have to be very strong, not just within a department, but between departments. And there really is so many ways we can optimize for that and still have lots of flexibility for employees, and be a very progressive and what should I say, an organization that people want to work at. So that's my thinking.
Director Makachek?
I'll be quick. We hosted an event on Saturday afternoon, evening outside, and so far too cold. There were 23 people there. Of the 23, 19 had one or more vaccinations. 2 of them got vaccinated on Sunday, so that would bring it up to 21 of the 23. One of those 2 has strong allergies, and they're concerned about the vaccine, and then one person was an anti-vaxxer. So I think we're going to come back with a very resilient population here. And I agree with everything that was said and Garisha's approach. So that's good to start talking about it and take a hybrid approach. One of those 23 people, now this one's a bit frightening. He's a senior executive with a global company. He has 60 employees that report through his organization in India. Of those 60 people, 51 had COVID. And of those 60 people, 37 had one or more parents die in the prior 45 days. Though we have things, we're doing okay here, I think, anyways. So there's a couple of thoughts for you.
And Giras, I'll add a few comments too. I'm supportive of moving forward with some kind of hybrid model. I know we're gonna see how it goes, make adjustments, change some things, see how it goes, make some more adjustments. And I think one of the places I worry a little bit is, most employees will do fine working remotely, but you're going to have a few that are going to have focus issues, and you're going to have to figure out how you and your managers will help those people stay on task. And I'm not saying it's going to be a lot, but there'll always be a few, and you'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But I don't worry too much about it, because the technology has really improved. In the tech world, I've been a project manager for large part of my 25 years in tech. And so, and I had meetings I had to do where I had people in Malaysia or in Europe or other places in the US, and we always managed, and that was with usually just conference calls. Right now you have so much better technology. Of course we would do a video call, which was a lot less flexible than Zoom. And I really there's companies out there wanting to make money. I bet you they're all thinking, okay, now in this new hybrid world, what do we do next to make it better? And I can imagine you having conferences where you've got 3/4 of the people there, but you got a few that are remote. But you need to make, hopefully there'll be some new technology that'll make it feel like they're in the room a lot more. A lot of times you can't hear very well, so maybe it's multiple microphone locations. Maybe it's multiple screens. Maybe there's something better than Zoom. One good thing and bad thing about Zoom is only one person can talk at a time, and sometimes that doesn't work, and sometimes it's nice, obviously. So maybe there's other options coming. So I think that, yeah, we need to move forward, and we see, how does technology help us? How are people going to adjust and keeping themselves motivated? As Yvonne said, as the kids start to go home or go back to school, that we could have a lot more productivity increase there. I do like the idea. I think you need to think about which kinds of positions work remotely better than others. I know some, there's going to be some team members that need to pop into somebody's office, another office, and they're constantly popping into offices, and those people need to probably be on site more often. Like if you have a project manager, if they're the only one not on site, that doesn't work very well. For example, project manager loses track of what the team's doing. So I say move forward and adjust as we go. Any other comments on this? Looks like, go ahead.
So I've talked to the exec committee and to the finance committee today. I was thinking of maybe bringing a shorter presentation to the board, which kind of summarizes kind of where we're going, just so that the entire board knows where we are. And I think the general sense I have is, hey, a hybrid approach is okay. Just you need to adapt, and it's not a one size fits all. So I've got a lot of feedback from all of you. And I think I have enough to actually, we can work within staff level and come up with some, at least that first phase, right? For October, what that's going to look like. So if that's okay with the board, with the finance committee, I'll make that presentation to the board in May.
I don't think I see any objections, so it looks good.
I think it's really important to not ignore the fact that there are concerns.
Not at all. So I will actually highlight that, and that, the concerns that you have, and I hope that some of the clarifications I made, Liz, on the interests will also give you a sense of comfort that it is a priority for me.
Director Martinez Beltran.
Hi, so I wanted to just also assure Director Gibbons, as much as I am a proponent for so many reasons, I too, especially being an extrovert, I absolutely see the value in meeting and really appreciate that. There's so many things that often I feel like things can get done sometimes faster because you do see somebody in person and you're able to quickly, resolve a certain issue. But I'm hoping that by perhaps staggering or alternating, or one of 3 meetings or something like that, this hybrid type approach, that we're able to get the best of both worlds, where we can really take advantage of clearly the advantages that technology brings to us, but also appreciating that gold standard of person to person that we all know is irreplaceable as well. So I'm hoping that we can, you know, be one of the leaders as SVCE, thanks to all of you, has always been.
Okay, any other comments? Any general committee or staff remarks before we adjourn? I guess we can end item number 5 and go to committee staff general remarks. Don't see any. It's almost 4 o'clock, so I guess we've timed this perfectly. Director Gibbons?
I just say I did get into the office, the new office. It's very nice. When you get in there and get to use the spaces, you'll enjoy.
Okay, sounds good. I'm waiting for my lunch.
For sure.
Yeah, I'll meet just for the lunch.
We will arrange that before you know it.
I'm kidding.
All right, well, with that, I guess we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.